Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. I know, it's been raining videos lately, right? Well, here's another one for you. Today I'll be taking a look at Ymir, one of the newer Saturn emulators out there. It's not brand new anymore, it's been around for a little while, but the most recent release included a new feature that's a first for Saturn emulation as far as I can tell, and for some games, it is absolutely transformative. Saturn Doom, for example, has a reputation for being one of the worst home versions of the game, especially on decent hardware like the Saturn. But you know what? We can fix it. How? Well, I'll show you the game, the results, and tell you the easy way to do it. I'm going to keep this video on the shorter side, but long enough so you can see what Ymir can fix, what it can't, and when to know the difference. So I'm not going to waste any more time with an intro, let's get on with it. First up, a super quick explanation of Ymir. It's a standalone Sega Saturn emulator available on Windows, Mac, and Linux as I record this video at the end of June 2026. I said it was relatively new earlier, so how new is it? Well, its first public version came out just over a year ago in May of 2025. Ymir is a standalone emulator. It's not in any cores for any emulation packages like RetroArch as I record this, and I haven't seen any information that it's expected to become a core in any of those programs anytime soon. So you just download Ymir and you can just run it the old-fashioned way, run it from a shortcut. I'll include a link in the description if you want to go download the emulator yourself after seeing this video. If you're a Saturn fan, you probably will want to do that if you haven't already. Ymir has added some features over time, as most emulators do, things that are available in many other emulators for Saturn, like changing those meshes into real transparencies. As an emulator in general, it's great with good performance on at least mid-range computers. I haven't tested it on anything lower end, so I can't speak about slower PCs. So the new feature that I mentioned earlier that was included in the most recent update that I have not seen in other Saturn emulators is the ability to control the speed of the SH2 CPUs and essentially overclock the emulated Saturn. Now, I double-checked other current emulators like Yabasanshiro, Mednafen, and the Beetle Saturn core and RetroArch. I even looked at SSF because I thought I remembered seeing something with CPU speed controls in that one, but nope. Looks like Ymir is indeed the first one to include this feature. Now, you might think that overclocking the CPU means you can bump every game up to 60 frames per second. If you think that, well, you're wrong! That's not what this is going to be about. So get that out of your head. There are various patches you can try to do things like that if you're looking to do that, but most of the speed up in games you'll get from patches in that way have other negative side effects like running way too fast and just other weird problems. What Ymir's overclocking does do is basically take a game that struggled to hit its maximum frame rate, like Saturn Doom, and it makes it so it hits that maximum frame rate basically all the time. For a game like Doom that was kind of garbage before, it makes it absolutely stable and extremely playable, and now one of the better versions of Doom from that era. And I know you couldn't do it on real hardware, obviously, but if you want to see in an alternate world what Saturn Doom would have looked like if the SH2s had been faster, you can do that now. So let's begin with Doom. Here it is side by side with the standard speed to the left and overclocking enabled on the right. You may not think it looks too different right away, but look closely. You'll especially notice it in more open areas at the normal speed. The game's frame rate just starts to absolutely chug. Gets down to about 10 in some places. Meanwhile, on the overclock side, the game's frame rate stays completely stable and never misses a beat. Let's look at this at half speed to get an even better idea of just what things here are like. And you can really see the frame rate drops on the left side now versus the stability on the right side. Let's look at a few other examples from Doom here. Alrighty, so that's an idea of how Doom runs. I played through several levels of it with the overclock at maximum speed, which again is 5 times the speed of a real system, and I did not notice a drop in any of the levels. It really made this game kind of a joy to play. I didn't want to put it down. So Doom is probably the game helped more than any other by the new overclocking feature that's in the emulator Ymir. But what other games can it make a difference with? Well, let's jump over to a few other first-person shooters here. Let's look at Quake. Quake on the Saturn already had a great reputation. It has a lot of fancy lighting effects, it looked pretty good, it has stability in areas that are relatively small, but in larger open areas, it does still have instances where that frame rate just absolutely chugs. And there are just different spots throughout the game where you'll encounter that. So running this in Ymir with the overclocking enabled also transforms this so that Quake essentially always runs at its maximum frame rate of about 30 frames per second. If you look at this section here, it's kind of a framey mess on the Saturn. Meanwhile, in Ymir, with the overclock enabled, this actually looks great, maintains that speed, everything's fine on it. And I'm not dunking on Quake here. Like I said, it is really good and has earned its reputation for being one of the better ports of the game in the era, especially on the hardware that we had at the time. It's not going to compare to something like running Quake on a 3DFX enabled PC or anything like that, but for the Saturn hardware, this is much better and much more playable. It's a more enjoyable experience without having to deal with any of those sometimes just sporadic drops you would see as you were moving around and navigating the game. Let's check out another first-person shooter. This time we'll look at one of my old favorites, Duke 3D. So Duke Nukem 3D was a great game with a lot of personality, some of which people may view as a bit problematic today, but hey, it's good, it's of its era. As long as you view it that way, I don't think anyone will really have problems with it. But anyway, some open areas in Duke 3D also chug really hard, just like Quake, and I'd say it happens more often in Duke 3D than it does in Quake. Now, Duke 3D is still well regarded and had high contemporary reviews for the Saturn back when it was released, and the 3D engine is really good. It was actually made by the same people that made Quake on the Saturn, Lobotomy Software, who also did Power Slave before that. Power Slave, if you don't know, is basically a proto-Metroidvania. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much here. So for Duke 3D, you can see some real examples. That frame rate just gets destroyed in the Saturn original, yet it maintains absolutely perfectly when we're using the speed up, the overclock in Ymir. So this is another game that I wanted to replay. I always wanted to play the Saturn version, but I was too used to play this on PC without any of these slowdowns, and I honestly found it kind of hard to deal with the Saturn one and all its slowdown back in the day. But playing it like this, it was great. I didn't have any problems, and it made it a lot more fun to play through. Let's look at a game that maybe doesn't have so great a reputation this time. Here's Robotica for the Saturn. Now this may look like a standard first-person shooter, but it's really not. This game is a complete roguelike FPS. The layouts of the floors changes all the time. It works kind of like mystery dungeon games if you know those and you're not really familiar with other roguelikes. So basically you'll have a bunch of rooms and hallways that connect to other rooms. The floors change every single time you play the game. And development on this one started early in the Saturn's life, and it shows. It's got a lot of performance problems, even in areas where there's almost nothing going on. Its frame rate drops to practically nothing in some places, as you can see. So if we enable that overclock in Ymir, hey, look at that! The problem is completely solved. So now you can play Robotica without any of the crippling slowdown that you might have experienced in that game in the past. And while this one does not have a great reputation, I've played this one from start to finish, and I actually kind of liked it. You can kind of get in the mood for it as you go along. If you like roguelike things and stuff that changes every time you play it, well, here you go. This is one to try out. Next, let's look at another famous example of problems, and that's Sega Touring Car. This was a huge disappointment when it came out for the Saturn. After amazing conversions of things like Daytona and Sega Rally, and yes, I'm including Daytona in there, it was a great game despite the low frame rate, and even Manx TT Superbike when that came out, this game just had lots of problems that those games didn't. And Manx wasn't even developed by Sega while this was. So for Sega Touring Car, the absolute biggest problem this game has is inconsistency. And it has basically micro drops, but it causes the game to slow down and speed up. So when you're going around some turns, if there's some slowdown because of stuff on the screen that makes the frame rate dip for just a couple of seconds, it seriously affects your ability to control the car. So it's something that greatly affected the gameplay, and that is probably the biggest issue that this game had. So if we look at the FPS through the emulator itself, it doesn't look like it drops very much on those parts. But you can just tell by looking at it that it's very inconsistent. So what about with Ymir? Well, with Ymir, it fixes those basically micro stutters that would happen, especially when you had a lot of stuff on screen or when you were driving under arches and things like that, that would cause the game to slow down for a split second and screw up your controls. I wouldn't say this one is fixed as completely and totally as something like Doom on the Saturn, but it is noticeable and it does play better than it used to before enabling the overclock. So this is another one where it's worth doing. Let's also take a look at Mystaria Realms of Lore, and if you didn't know, this game was originally released as Mystaria Realms of Lore and was retitled to Blazing Heroes because of a copyright issue with the folks that owned Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, since they have a place called Mystara in that game. So they're the same games other than the name. Now this game has an atrocious frame rate on the Saturn, and nothing is going to fix that. It's low even in Ymir with the overclock enabled, so why am I showing this to you? Well, what I want to talk about here is Ymir does actually make this game a bit more playable. See, on the Saturn, despite its very low frame rate, and almost all microcabin developed games have very low frame rates, as you move around the map, there's a sluggishness that happens with the control and the speed and everything. So if we enable the overclock to maximum in Ymir, it definitely mitigates that noticeably. So you can feel it in the controls when you enable that. It's still not going to exceed its maximum frame rate, it can't do that, but it does feel a little better, and some of the control is slightly more responsive. And when we're talking about super low frame rates like this, having it even a little more responsive can make a huge difference. So let me show you a few things that are not really changed in any meaningful way by the overclock in Ymir. I'm only going to spend a brief moment on this part. So here's Daytona USA first. This game only ran at 20 frames per second and had loads of pop-in. Still played great despite that. Now the thing is, it was a very consistent 20 frames per second, so enabling the overclock in Ymir really doesn't have any noticeable effect on this game at all, except that every time I tried it, it screwed up something with the sound. So that's the downside that we experienced there, and is a possible side effect you can encounter in any game. So next up, what about Daytona USA Champion Circuit Edition on the Saturn? This enhanced version of the original with 2 extra tracks that ran at 30 frames per second was also surprisingly consistent frame rate wise. So pumping up the speed in Ymir didn't really have any effect on this one at all. And one more game I figured I'd throw on here is Wipeout XL. This is another racing game for the Saturn that runs at only 20 frames per second like the original Daytona. But again, it was a very consistent 20 frames per second, so overclocking Ymir basically doesn't have any effect at all in this one. I did enable the mesh transparency so you can get a look at what that's like if you haven't seen that, but that is available in other Saturn emulators. Alright, and that's where I'm going to stop the examples here. So I'm going to leave on a little bit of a level of Doom that I played all the way through to the end as I wrap this up. Ymir is a great Saturn emulator. It has a lot of options that other Saturn emulators have, and some that they don't, like this new SH2 boost feature, which it wouldn't surprise me if it shows up in updated versions of some other emulators soon. Now it does have some downsides when you increase the speed, as I just mentioned with Daytona, it screws up the sound. Other games have sound issues as well. Some other games won't function properly if you try running them overclocked like that. So it's not a fix-all for every game that's out there. Also for Ymir itself, I'm running it in Windows 10, and I had a couple of crashes and a couple of times where it would just stop launching. The first time I was able to go into its config file and fix that. The second time, I had to delete the config file and launch it and reconfigure the whole entire thing again from scratch. So just be aware that this is very much still a work in progress, even though it's very far along now. You may still run into some issues with it, but I think it's worth checking out already, especially if you're a Doom fan and you wanted to see Saturn Doom running actually smoothly at all times. And I should note that it's fully playable like that too. And for Saturn Doom, it's not just the cosmetics of having a better frame rate, it makes aiming and going exactly where you want much better, and it makes the controls feel dramatically better also. So Doom fans, absolutely check it out. If you love Duke 3D and Quake, absolutely check it out. Alright, I'm going to wrap this up here. Tell me, what do you guys think? Have you tried Ymir yet? Have you played around with this new CPU boosting feature? What were your experiences with it? Have you had problems with it, crashing, or having to delete the config file like I did? Let me know in the comments. And that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss any of my videos. If you want to support the work that I do here, you can do that on Patreon, Ko-fi, or right here on YouTube through things like Super Thanks or channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.